The Murmurs Machine by Jeffrey G. Roberts. Once upon a time, in a distant, nondescript world, so irrelevant, dull, and insignificant, indeed a world so devoid of astronomical interest whatsoever, that spacefarers often slammed right into it due to terminal boredom just staring at it, there lived an equally humdrum race of beings called Murmurs. Their world was the planet Murm. This fact was probably the only thing that did make sense on this ball of mud. Now, in the galaxy where Murm comfortably resided, orbiting its equally boring sun, some 75 skadillion light-years away, there existed thousands of other civilizations, most also extremely dull and unworthy of exploration, and each had their own particular set of complex and convoluted spiritual beliefs. Some involved the worshipping of pastries, which I believe I will convert to presently, while others adhered to the practice of inhaling the sweat of 1,000-pound beasts called poogs, believing this to be the ideal mystical way of opening a portal to the higher realms. But far be it from me to disparage the religious beliefs of other beings. But in the case of Murm, I shall make an exception, for theirs was truly idiotic. Millennia earlier, several wise men, and I use that term advisedly, suddenly had an epiphany. It dawned on them that the reason their God was apparently not answering the prayers and supplications of the Murmurs was that raising your voice and shouting was now considered to be an act of haughtiness, a show of arrogance. They reasoned that putting oneself on an equal standing with God by raising your voice to him was blasphemy. And since no one on Murm wanted the moniker of blasphemer hanging over their heads, a codex or holy book was compiled to codify the principles of right living, known as the Silent Epistles of St. Ergelgurps the Numb. And thus, down through the ages, right up to the present time, the Murmurs on Murm adhered to a strict code of almost silent communication, until it involved all facets of life on their world. And of course, it soon became quite apparent that this was a very bad idea indeed. But no one dared question the Holy Writ. It would have branded them a heretic and a blasphemer, not to mention being blasted into zoo dust by an angry creator. To be sure, some doubted the teachings of St. Ergelgurps the Numb, but a few were brave enough to speak up. It was never conclusively proven, nor did anyone have the testicular fortitude to try, but this strange attitude might have had something to do with the incident their holy books referred to as, in hushed tones, as the Great Mocking. Murm history records that 2,888 years ago, one Nunc Bavoon, thoroughly disgusted at having to ask, "What?" in hushed tones 9,347 times a month, and thoroughly inebriated, staggered into the street one day, raised his fist heavenward and screamed, "You stink!" Whereupon a boulder the size of a buffalo fell from the sky, promptly flattening him. No one ever uttered a word louder than a whisper after that. True, in the centuries to come it was determined that Mount Bukva had a minor eruption on that very date and time. Also true was poor Nunc Bavoon's extreme bad luck to be standing precisely in the path of its volcanic excretions. But one thing had nothing to do with another, wise men of old eventually pronounced. We understand now how volcanoes work. But the blasphemous Bavoon was squished by God for his arrogance. Plain and simple. One was geology, one was divine providence, and that was the end of it. They would have sacrificed a virgin to shut the stupid thing up, but they couldn't find any. Besides, the spiritual damage was done. It didn't help that one of Murm's moons, actually just a giant asteroid, had the shape of an accusatory finger, and guess who it was perpetually pointing at? For as long as anyone could remember, homes, offices, and apartment buildings, indeed every construction project on Murm had, within easy reach, a large bucket of water placed every few yards. Why? Simple. If a construction worker committed the unpardonable sin of, say, striking his finger with a hammer, with a resultant overpowering urge to scream obscenities in several colorful languages, the bucket was there to plunge his head into. In this way, said screams would be effectively muffled. Better this than incurring the wrath of an angry God. Amazing, though, how many murmurs died from accidental drowning. Indeed, many buildings often fell apart due to mumbled worker instructions being unintelligible. But if they did fall on people, they wouldn't dare cry out due to, well, you know. Fundamentalist murmurs took their beliefs to ridiculous lengths by wearing specially designed flatulence suppressors. Singing was also reduced to mere whispering, making the preference of entertainer a poor vocation choice, to be sure. Nightclubs were almost as dilapidated and empty as Murm churches. On Murm, arguments were largely non-existent. Unfortunately, ulcers weren't. But what the Murmurs never realized, the simple truth which never dawned on them, it wasn't that their prayers weren't being answered because they were raising their voices to God. They weren't being answered because their God couldn't hear them. Indeed, the many times adherents of the silent epistles of St. Ergelgerbs the Numb beseeched their God with prayers, all he heard was a faint buzzing sound and shooed them away, thinking them mere pesky mosquitoes. And thus there came a time when Murm was on the verge of moral and spiritual collapse, until one man, a murmur who marched to the beat of a different drummer, although quietly, came upon the scene. An iconoclast who was determined to reawaken the glory, if you want to call it that was once Murm. His name, Ning Broomglide. I love my world, but they're dimwits. I love my family, but they're idiots. I must prove the silent epistles of St. Ergelgerbs the Numb to be a tub of poog crap. But how? And he thought and pondered, ruminated and wondered, until it came to him one day like an epiphany while sitting under a fruit tree, and an apple fell on his head. Aha! He proclaimed, I've discovered the concussion. And when he'd recovered, the real epiphany came to him. I could shout heavenward at the top of my lungs, and I know God would surely hear me, the first murmur to be heard by him in millennia. But I have no doubt that soon thereafter I'd be locked up in a nut house, imprisoned, or worse, lynched. Either way, I'd be forever branded a heretic and blasphemer for committing the sacrilege of raising my voice to God. Then would come the dark age for Murm, and I'd never be able to prove that we've been wrong for 3,000 years. It was truly a dilemma, how to shout without shouting and not get caught doing it. It was here that he had his second eureka moment. Well, not to have it under an apple tree. It now dawned on him exactly how he was going to achieve his dream. I'll build a machine in secret out in the forest, a machine pointed straight at heaven, a vocal magnifier. My whispered words to God will be amplified 1,000,000 times. And when he finally hears us, a new golden age for Murm will emerge. Which is precisely what Ning Broomglide proceeded to do. Rube Goldberg would have been pleased. It looked like a calliope on steroids, and took him several months to build in secret. It had pistons and pumps, and what was that smell? Like a combination of shellac, hot fudge, and kitten vomit. A giant curved trumpet-like megaphone made of glistening copper towered some 20 feet above the forest floor, and it was connected to a tiny microphone, considered satanic by Murm religion. Dials and switches, wires and gears were everywhere. What were they all for? And in the dead of night, one fateful eve, while poog beasts defecated with wild abandon, murmurs planet-wide were accidentally drowning in water buckets, and flatulence was kept secret from angels on high, Ning Broomglide, hoped-for savior of Murm, snuck into the woods undetected, uncovered his machine, and turned it on. And under the twin full moons of Murm, while they cast haunted shadows onto swaying trees, Dozens of gears began turning, pumps started pumping, pistons began, well, pisting, and blue and green smoke began puffing out of a myriad of brass pipes. The giant curved horn began to vibrate imperceptibly at first. Within 10 minutes, Ning was bathed in a green light. This was his signal. He pulled a little chair up to the microphone, took a deep breath, but first put his hand over it and whispered, "That's one small phrase from a murmur, one giant shout for mermkind." Catchy, he thought. Then he moved his hand away, took another deep breath, and said in a normal tone, "Hello, God." And a million, squirtillion, gazillion light years and 837 dimensions away, God himself, the great creator, a.k.a. the big G's, the I am because I say I am, the big kahuna, etc., was in a cosmic slumber in the Horsehead Nebula, visions of how great it was that he invented sugar plums dancing in his head. All of a sudden, a sound, like every creature in the universe farting and screaming simultaneously, rent all of creation with a force that sent every planet in existence to quivering and jiggling like lime jello, or 470 trillion strippers in unison, but we won't go there. It sent God reeling from his slumber as he sat bolt upright. What the hell was that? And he looked up, down, and across all of creation to find the offending civilization that dared interrupt his slumber. It figures! Merm! Those morons! They say I'm a vengeful God? Damn straight. Watch this. And in an instant, he took away all the Murmur's voice boxes. But, not being 100% heartless, he left them with a unique way to still communicate. Telepathy. But in time, irony of ironies, a most curious thing began to occur. In their silence, the Murms rejected the idiotic teachings of St. Ergelgerbs the Numb and turned spiritually inward with their now quiet minds to music. Folk songs, actually. Though they could not sing, they could hear and play instruments of an incredible variety, and in time, folk tunes echoed across Murm, loudly. God thought he would lose his mind. Could these idiot murmurs not be silenced? He seriously considered turning Murm into cookie crumbs, but not today. Not now. The irony was too funny to stay angry. And the moral of the story? Be careful what you wish for. The sounds of silence may not be the end.